GPHG is supposed to be the Oscars for watches, but I'm going to be honest with you, it's basically a pay-to-play luxury party judged by people who don't even buy watches, and I would know because they literally put me on the jury somehow. And the wild part though, I think the two most important watches of the entire year in horology didn't even win a single award, let alone be nominated. GPHG doesn't represent the best in watchmaking anymore. It basically just represents brands who can afford to play the game, which brings us to part one, the money problem. Most awards show these days there's some sort of money element involved, and I completely understand that. But to be fully transparent, I've talked to some brands in the space after posting this video, and they told me how much it costs to be involved in GPHG. Just to enter your watch into the ring in order to be voted on by people like me, it cost 800 Swiss francs, at least as of last year. Now, this doesn't sound like a lot of money, but the amount of brands submitting their watches because they want to be recognized, they want to be part of the Oscars for watches, this gets to be a little crazy. And that's not the only money. Then you actually have to be nominated. So not only are you entering your watch just to potentially be nominated, once you're nominated, then to be on the ballot, from what I've been told, don't shoot the messenger, it costs 7,000 Swiss francs. If you add up all the brands who've been nominated plus all the brands who submitted their watches, that's a pretty big check if you ask me. And what does this tell me? One, small brands can't afford this. If you're doing 200, 250 watches a year, a $7,000, really $8,000 plus buying your seats at the show, plus flying in, plus the hotels and everything, that gets to be really expensive. Meaning that small brands who might be doing really great things won't get recognized at all because they don't have the money to play the game to be involved in this party. So in other words, a lot of the times the big brands will win. And the brands who are super connected in the watch industry, but not really connected with the everyday people like you and me. So in other words, big brands win or expensive watches win. So it's not really an award show, it's actually like a cover charge. Which brings us to point two. There were some big name watch brands that weren't involved that probably should have been. The first of which was the Rolex Land Dweller. Now, whatever you think about the look of this watch, the aesthetic, how it wears, whatever, that is beside the point. Between the first 5 hertz movement from Rolex, which is the Rolex Movement 7135, and the Dynapulse Escapement, which is a first of its kind, which actually makes the watch 30% more efficient, this is one of the biggest things to happen in horology all year long. And nowhere did I see Rolex, in particular, nowhere did I see the Land Dweller on everything. And what does this tell me? Because Rolex is definitely a brand that can afford to put their watches on the ballot. What this tells me is the biggest brand in the world does not care at all about GPHG, which is kind of ironic sometimes because Tudor always submits watches, but that's aside the point. The point is, if a brand that actually can afford it isn't submitting their watch, I still feel like they should still be nominated. I mean, at least me, I would have nominated this watch for one of the awards because of how important it is in the canon of horology. But it was nominated because they didn't pay. And then at that point, nobody really cares. And that's not the only watch, like I talked about in the beginning, that probably should have won something or at least been involved in GPHG somehow. Enter the Vacheron Constantin Solaria, which is the most complicated wristwatch of all time. I'm going to repeat that for you. It's the most complicated wristwatch of all time. And somehow, at GPHG, it did not win an award. How is that possible? I do not know. But these two watches alone not winning awards show the illegitimacy of what GPHG is doing. And again, like I told you, I'm on the jury. I'm voting for these watches. So it's not like I'm upset that I'm not involved. I am involved, but I'm not at the top upper echelon. I'm just a random person that's voting on watches because so many people these days are actually on the jury that have no business, like me, actually being on it. So how do you take the most important watch show of all time and really take it seriously when the two most important releases of the entire year weren't involved? Brings us, again, like I said, to the jury problem. These days, I feel like I scroll on Instagram and I click on random profiles and so many people are on the GPHG jury or whatever they're calling it. So much so that I was getting ticked off at one point because I'm like, I have 200,000 followers on TikTok and I'm not on the GPHG. Well, that's crazy, but I wasn't going to pursue it because I kind of knew in the back of my mind that it was kind of ridiculous. But it was one of those things, kind of like a proof of concept. People put it in their Instagram bios. But at this point, all you have to do to get on a jury is essentially just have one person nominate you and they'll send you an email and let you in. I'm not really sure if there was any kind of vetting process. When you take a look at the Oscars, for example, which people already have their own issues with, I think in order order to be in the academy, or whatever you call it, you have to win an Oscar. You have to be super involved in the movie industry, like very involved or very good at what you do. And the watch industry is like, oh, you posted a couple of videos, okay, you're on. Like it doesn't make sense to me. So there's no taste test. There's no background requirement for what you do, at least to my knowledge. And many of these jurors, I'll be completely honest with you, don't even like watches, which you've probably heard from other creators in the watch industry, particularly This Watch, That Watch. I said this a number of times, but he's 100% right. Which brings us to our next point. There's a really taste disconnect between the watch industry with GPHG and the actual collector tastes throughout the watch industry. The watches that win these awards don't really affect what the real people, the everyday collector, want. In my opinion, what they reflect is what the ultra rich or the people high up in the watch industry want to win. GPHG, I don't think, is really consumer taste, it's boardroom taste. I'm going to use one example. Before I say this, I just want to say that people that run this brand, I've met them a number of times. They're lovely, they're very nice. So I'm not knocking them at all. I am knocking their watch brand, which they might be the same, but I kind of want to say what I want to say. Denison's a brand. They won the Challenger Watch Prize. If you don't know, they release a watch around 700 Swiss francs, just under $1,000 if you're watching from the US. And they're essentially quartz watches with stone dials. And for whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure. I know that they enlisted this guy named Emmanuel Goulet, I think that's his name. He essentially designed the Royal Oak Offshore. That's his big claim to fame, which is hilarious because the Royal Oak Offshore is essentially just a derivative of the actual Royal Oak made by Gerald Gento. So he basically just designed something that's almost a copy, if that makes sense. But anyway, I know what his rates are to design a watch, and they're hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this brand has some real cash on them. I'm not entirely sure how they've won, but if you've ever had hands-on with a Denison watch, comment below your actual opinion, because in my opinion, even though it's quartz, that's completely fine. I've suggested quartz watches at $1,000. Even though it's a stone dial, I've suggested quartz watches with stone dials, namely the Bulova Super Seville stone dial watches at $1,000 all day long. The problem with this watch is the build quality. Anybody that's ever gotten hands-on with this watch, you know, you might like the aesthetic, that's great, but there's no reason a Challenger Watch Prize is supposed to be the cheaper watch they should win at all. I feel like there were so many other really cool watches nominated or not nominated. For example, a similarly aesthetic watch, which is the Anoma A1, I feel like is way cooler than this Denison. But you have to be connected, you have to have money in order to win these things. And that, again, is just evident. If you ask the everyday consumer, the people watching this video, most of you probably haven't heard of Denison, but if you have heard of Denison, that's not in your taste budget at all, because the majority of people who are actually consuming watches, consuming YouTube, reading about watches, being on Instagram, or taking photos, or just being a collector in general, you want no business with that. But the people high up in the watch industry think that's the greatest thing, so that's the thing that wins. Which brings us to step 5. This is really all over the watch industry, and I might get a little bit of hate for this, but the parties involved. I know a lot of people say, oh, creators get paid, they make money from watch brands. I've personally worked with a number of watch brands, I'm being completely honest. But the lavish parties, it's unbelievable. My first experience with this was at Watches and Wonders in April, and I love Watches and Wonders. I'm really excited to go this year. But the after parties that some of these brands throw, they bring in, 4 Michelin star chefs. Usain Bolt will be there, or like there's millions of dollars being spent, the highest end champagne you could possibly buy to almost woo you in order to be involved. And I think the craziest part of all of this is if you look at the actual GPHG award show, I don't think I saw one YouTube creator. And for me, when I got into watches, I was watching YouTube first before I was reading articles on Hodinkee, reading articles on Blog to Watch, any Revolution or whatever. But if you take a look at some of these people involved, it's all writers, it's all people who've been in the industry for 30, 40 years. They're not recognizing that YouTube is the place to be. That's coming from me. I'm just kind of getting started in YouTube. I've been on TikTok and Instagram, if you don't know, but there's not real representation of the collector, because at the end of the day, the YouTubers and the people making content are driving the money. It's not the people high up at the brands and the money involved. So here's my takeaway. I don't think GPHG needs to go away. I don't think that at any means possible. I think it's really great for the industry to have an Oscars for watches, the biggest award show every single year. I just think a couple of things need to change. One, there needs to be more representation from the people, the actual collectors. They need to have some say in what's being voted on. They have some say as to what wins. Because at the end of the day, even though marketing budgets would reflect that, because more people are going to see a Rolex on and vote for that over other brands, but there has to be, it's kind of like when you're voting for the MVP in the NBA, for example. The people vote, the coaches vote, and the players vote, and I think some writers as well. Like, there's 3 facets of the voting, which I think is really important. But at GPHG, it's just one facet. If you're super involved in the watch industry, I was one of them. Number 2, which I think will be the most important thing. If you are voting on a category or a watch, you have to have experience hands-on with that watch every single time before you vote. I think this is a big problem with GPHG. The fact that there's so many people involved, I think there should be some sort of checking to make sure you've had hands-on with the watch, you've seen the watch, you've talked to people involved in the brand, anything like that before you vote on it. Like, for example, for me, right, I voted on a bunch of stuff. I was like, I didn't even have hands-on with this. I can only imagine how my opinions would change in person. If you've seen a watch, you know what I'm talking about. And I feel like there should be some sort of rule. I feel like GPHG should go around to all the major cities, which I think they did this year, at least they did it last year, and bring all the watches so you can experience. You should be able to get a check mark in the system, and then you can vote. I really don't think, if you're not going to allow the public to vote, that's completely fine, but I feel like there should be a little bit more objectivity than voting on a photo you saw on Instagram. I'm pretty sure the Oscars does this. If you're involved or voting on a category, you have to see everything. I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like that just makes sense, right? If you like this solution, you like this video, comment, like, subscribe, whatever. Thank you so much for watching. We're always sharing truths here. I think not my last video was not negative, but the one before that was negative. I'm trying to be more positive, but I just feel like there's not a lot of truth tellers on social media and YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, and I'm really trying to do that. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully GPHG can be fixed. GPHG is probably watching this. I'm probably getting kicked off the panel, but